Ready to go?
Yes, we are. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Barbara, for joining us. And over to you.
Okay, thank you, David, for having me, and to the entire Startup Grind team, Elodie and Lorenzo also. I'm really happy to be here tonight, and since we've lost a little bit of time in terms of because of technical issues, I'm going to dive right into the presentation. So my name is Barbara Fischer. I'm the founder of Arena Ventures, which is a startup consultancy based in Zurich. I help startups at any stage with their fundraising and also with business development advice. And before I start with tonight's presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself. I would describe myself first and foremost as an entrepreneur. Here, the picture you see here is me back in 2005 when I started my first business called Trendhaus. It was a marketing tech software firm based in Sydney, and I was able to grow this business to 15 full-time employees and a very solid customer base within the first 6 years. And then after basically short of 7 years, I was able to sell it. And together with my husband and our then young son, we came back to Europe. So I am German by background, but since I've spent a very good part of my life in Australia, I am now also Australian by passport, and also a little bit of my heart is still there. So I explained to you what I do. I help other entrepreneurs grow their businesses since 2016. And I'm mainly focused on European companies. So either I work a lot with actually founders in the Balkan region, so in Kosovo, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Albania, and so forth. But at the same time, I also work with a lot of seed stage companies and Series A companies in the DACH region, so German-speaking region, and UK, and a bit in France. So yeah, that's about me. Tonight, I would like to share with you my top 8 tips and tricks for fundraising in times of COVID. I think that there are some tips that are applicable to pre-COVID times as well, but they are even more important now in times of COVID. So I would like to start with the time and effort that's required from the founders' end, because often I see that founders underestimate the time of fundraising. So my first tip would be to be realistic. So judging from my basically past 4 years of experience working with startups on all different stages and in various countries throughout Europe, I have seen that there is one general rule that you can say, and it takes on average 5 to 6 months, regardless of the amount that you're raising. Don't think that because you're raising 200,000, it takes less time than when you're raising 5 million, because it doesn't. It takes exactly the same time. So it takes about 5 to 6 months. Then it will take, in the beginning, maybe when you start fundraising, it might take 50% of your time. But once you really get into the negotiation stage, it will take about 120% of your time. So please prepare for this, prepare for what you are going to do if, for example, you are taken 2 or 2.5 months really intensely, basically your time gets taken for the fundraising round. What do you then do to still enable the business to grow in that time and not for sales to go down? So plan for that. Also, you will need to talk to about 30 to 40 qualified investor targets. I often hear founders say, "Oh, Barbara, we've spoken to about 10 people or 20 people, and still we've got no one who is interested in my idea." And then I always say to these founders, okay, so you keep going. You keep talking to people. Once you call me and you tell me that you've spoken to 40 and there is no interest, there must either be a problem with your pitch, or maybe the sector that you are in is maybe not hot at that moment. But until you've spoken to 40, you will simply need to keep contacting people, qualified people. So let's say in Alexandra's case, you are in the case of education tech. What you have in basically your business, it's called education tech. In that space, you need to basically, there's no point talking to somebody who is into let's say, fintech, so financial technology, you need to talk to 30 to 40 people who are into education tech. And that's really important in the process. And also, obviously, ensure that your business is growing once you go out and you start fundraising. So the second slide on this is obviously check that your cash flow situation, so the money in your bank, that there's sufficient money in the bank for the next 6 to 8 months as a minimum. I would always say have enough money for 1 year. So for example, when I started my business, I had enough money in the bank to pay for myself, like not greatly, but I could pay for my living, as well as for the 2 people I employed in the first month. I could pay for them for a year and 2 months. So I knew I had to really make money or enough money after a year and 2 months, or else find funding. And in my case, I bootstrapped the business completely. I basically grew it without external funding. But I mean, it really depends on your business. I think it's also completely valid to take outside funding, but then save for it or find a source of funding, maybe, for example, from your family or from friends that know you well, where you can actually sleep well at night. Because if you know that you only have 3 months of money, of cash in the bank, and you need to have the funding in by then, it can become quite an uncomfortable situation. Yeah. Also for the due diligence, so when an investor shows interest, be prepared to basically present to them quite often. And also I've seen it a couple of times that even though the term sheet was signed, so basically the contract with the investors was signed, the round, so the funding round was still not closed. So the round will only be closed when the money is in the bank, because until then, even though the contracts are signed, there could still be hiccups in terms of contractual issues and so forth that can make the deal fall apart. So now with COVID, my recommendation, as I said before, and which I recommend anyhow in general, is that depending on the sector, it will take 8 to 12 months for you to get funding, and also the stage of your business. Usually very young businesses have got a harder time finding money now, simply because business angels are not investing so much at the moment. They are looking after their existing portfolios. And also, again, depending on the sector that you are in, so the space that you are in, for example, travel tech or entertainment, hospitality, anything to do with music, these types of companies have got a really tough time at the moment. And what I see them doing, I'm working with a couple of tech companies in B2C in the entertainment space. What they are doing is they are, for example, looking at expanding their audience. So they are opening up their platforms, for example, not just to the music industry, but to a wider audience, or they are pivoting altogether, meaning they are looking at a completely different business model. But talking about happy times, as I said to you before, I work also with a number of companies, both in the Balkan region as well as here in Central Europe. And it's amazing to see how beautifully some e-commerce companies are growing, like pure e-commerce players. Some of them I see have grown by 60% compared to last year, year-on-year growth, I mean. Marketplaces I see growing, edtech, a lot of B2B businesses are growing. So basically there's both. I've brought you here a slide. I've basically made a chart of the companies that I'm working with, and that's 30 tech companies that I work with either as a sparring partner, so working with them on a month-to-month basis or on an ongoing basis. And what you can see here in the blue is that 40% are still on track according to their business plan. So you could say that about 50% are still growing according to plan. Then the purple part, you see that some companies are doing slightly worse than they planned, and 10%, especially in travel tech, I have to say, are doing much worse than planned, or basically their revenues have come nearly to a standstill, which is sad to see. But yeah, anyway, it's not today's topic to talk about how they are dealing with the crisis, but they have found different ways how to deal with it. But then when we look at the green part, you see that 30% of the companies that I'm working with are doing better than planned because of COVID, or 10% are even growing exponentially because of it. So I would say this is anyhow, like, again, you know, when you look at the media, as I said to you before, there's a lot of dark news. But the fact is that when you look at your own environment sometimes and start to break it down into clusters, you see that the world is not quite as dark as it might look to others. So I would like to here briefly talk about the 6 month, because I hear it too often, Barbara, why does it take 6 months for this fundraising round to close? I give you here a real life example of a company that I've worked with and that where we've successfully found the funding. It's a Zurich-based company, B2B SaaS business called Raise Now. What they do is, let's say you are Red Cross or you are the World Wildlife Fund. So you are an NGO and you would like to raise donations on your platform. Then you call Marco, or actually his team, and you talk to the Raise Now team and say, hey, could you please come and insert your software into my website as a white label solution. So basically they integrate their software in, for example, the World Wildlife Fund website, and then the World Wildlife Fund can take donations from private people on their website. This is what they do. They also do this for smaller, like for example, for clubs. They do it for Verein, which is like a type of club in Switzerland, like it's a type of NGO, but very small. For schools and so on, for fundraisers. So Marco approached me 2 years ago and he said, hey, Barbara, we need somebody to help us with our fundraising. Can you come and work with us? And so I would just like to explain to you how we did it. So the preparation of the investor documents takes usually 4 to 6 weeks. So there's a number of documents that you need to have in place before you approach any investor, and they will anyhow expect you to have these documents, right? And that takes already a month or so. Then, not the whole time, obviously, but basically you do loops of changes, but then you have them completed. Then in phase number 2, you go out, you start talking to investors, you go to pitching events, you start writing emails to investors, to business angels, and so forth. And that usually takes 8 to 10 weeks. After that, you have got what I call phase 3, where you go into the due diligence. So that means you show to the investor all the relevant documents, police references, bank accounts, statements from previous years, things like that. And you go into negotiations about how much money should be invested, what the terms are of the deal, and so forth. And then in phase 4, you usually have a little bit of more negotiation in case you didn't have enough, and the term sheets are signed. And as I said before, the money is in the bank. So that usually takes another 2 to 3 weeks. And when you add up all these different phases, that takes you easy to 6 months. Let's say you take a holiday in between or whatever, then it can easily take 7 or 8 months or even longer. So the second tip from me for you is define your dream investor profile before you go out and you talk to investors. So define whether you would like to have, for example, a private investor, so a business angel, or let's say a family office, or if you would like to have a venture capital fund, right? And there's differences there. You can also define for yourself, would I like to have another entrepreneur as an investor, or would I prefer to have somebody with a finance background? For example, in venture capital funds, you often find people with a pure finance background. And that's great too, because they can actually guide you very well in terms of your projections, your future planning, and so on. But it really depends on your style, right? Some founders tell me, we just want to work with other entrepreneurs, people who have made it. And other people say, I'm agnostic, I don't really care, could be entrepreneurial or finance, but have a think about it. Then also define for yourself how many investors you would like, what type of values you would like them to have. Like, would you like them to be slightly more conservative in terms of style? Would you like them to be easygoing, like California style, San Francisco style? Or yeah, what type of culture would you like them to have? And very important, do your reference checks on them. Check what kind of basically call, for example, one of their portfolio companies and ask them, tell them, hey, we are about to sign an agreement with such and such investor. I know that you're one of his or her investments. Could you tell me a little bit more about how it is to work with them? You've been with them now for 2 years. So do your reference checks. And when you've done all of that, please put all of this on a small piece of paper. Like, you don't need to have multiple Post-its. You just have one Post-it, but post it somewhere where you see this profile every day. So for example, I don't have a dream investor profile, but whenever I have a goal, I put this on the inside of my bathroom mirror, because every morning when I open it, I see it right there, like the first thing in the morning. So to remind you, basically, will help you remind you what you would like to have in terms of investor. I have asked one of the founders who came to, I basically also host monthly masterclasses on fundraising. And one of the students in my masterclass was Eike Festini. She's a Swiss founder in the logistics tech space. Her company is called Lucabox. And she has by now, like in the last 2.5 years, raised 3 rounds. And I think this is quite exceptional. I don't know many people, even in Zurich or elsewhere, who raised 3 rounds in 2.5 years. So I asked her, hey, Eike, can you please tell me for the future students of the masterclass what your top 3 tips are in terms of the fundraising? So she said, be strategic about it, make a plan. Remember how I told you what happens if you have to go fundraising all the time, and what happens to the business then? Who is growing the business? Because one thing that investors hate is when the line stays stable. So your growth line basically either stays stable or goes down when you fundraise. Nobody wants to see that. They want to see the business growing. And I'm not saying like American style hockey stick, but they would like to see the business growing consistently month on month. So make a plan. Then second, she said, ensure that you and your investors share the same values. For example, Eike and her co-founder, they are all about diversity. I mean, they are 2 females, so 2 women. So for them, it was very important to have somebody who is conscious of diversity topics. They are all about ecological energy in their offices and so on. So they have values that they would like to share their investors too. And then last but not least, and she said, tell them that this is the most important. She said, only bring on board investors with experience in your space. So for example, Alexandra, I take you again because you mentioned the education tech. So Eike says, and I think it's true, only bring on people who have experience and a network in edtech. The same is for Karin. I think you said you have a startup in fashion. So bring in people with a fashion or e-commerce background and so on. Then tip number 3, do the beer test. So last year I met at an event a business angel, basically his name is Marcel Brenningmeier. He's one of the family of C&A, the department store. And Marcel Brenningmeier said on stage that whenever his team, basically he has an investment team, when they check incoming investor decks, so business plans from startups, they've got a certain checklist and they need to check, is this company something that Marcel would like to invest in? And then they either say, no, thumbs down, or they say thumbs up. And when they say thumbs up, Marcel said on stage that he goes with that team, he invites them to a bar or to a restaurant, and they have a beer. And in that moment, he asks himself, when they talk, he basically reflects a bit inside and he listens to his gut. And he asks himself, can I see myself being with these founders, like sitting with these founders in 1 year or in 2 years' time? And if his gut tells him, I actually don't see myself working with this founder team, then he doesn't invest. Even if all the other parameters are great, he will not invest if his gut tells him, don't do it. So my advice to you is do the beer test as well. Like you, even if it looks like, oh, maybe I don't have so much choice in terms of investors, ask yourself if you want to be with that investor in 2 years' time or in 5 years' time, because it's very likely that you will still be working together in 5 years' time, because that's how long it takes to usually exit a business. You know what I mean? To either sell it or to take it to the stock exchange, or basically some grow it even bigger. But usually it takes 5 years until the investment basically shows some returns. Then tip number 4, finding investors. My advice to you would be to go with a combo recommendation. So if you are a startup that is looking for anywhere between 100K and 1 million euro, or even under 100K, doesn't matter, my recommendation is to basically attend startup events in your own town or in your own country, because it's always easiest to find the investors in basically locally. And also use a software called Crunchbase Pro. So there's one version called crunchbase.com that you can use for free, but you will only have very limited access. But if you invest $29 per month, you will get the Pro license. And with this database, you can basically search any kind of investor for your business. Like you find investors in insurtech, in edtech, in property tech, any kind. And in my opinion, the Crunchbase is the best software out there in the world at the moment. And believe me, I've checked them all, AngelList, Seca, whatever, you name it, I've seen them. And I think that Crunchbase is the best. And by the way, I get no kickback from them. So finding investors, some more ideas. Combo recommendation, as I said to you, is the best, or has proven for me the best, but also you can apply to accelerator programs. So Anna said that she works for Kickstarter, but there's numerous in Munich, and not in Munich, sorry, in Zurich. There's also actually, Alexandra, there are in Tirana, there's a number of accelerators that you could work with. You can apply for grants or government programs. I am, for example, an expert advisor at, they call it experts, at InnoSwiss. So InnoSwiss is basically the department for innovation, or for Swiss innovation. So anybody who has their business in Switzerland, try InnoSwiss. Then there is crowdfunding programs, university alumni, and so forth. I mean, get creative, but my recommendation would be to find, number 1, people via your own network, and then also use Crunchbase. So here is one tip. Sorry if I now have to exclude the men for a second, but for women entrepreneurs, there's an increasing amount of female investors who only invest in female founders. So go and find them. How can you find them? You go to female founder business events and you ask other founders. Like, for example, if you go to an event with somebody like Eike, you know, from Lucabox, what I've showed you before, she will for sure tell you. But not just these types of events, go to any kind of meetup.com events, like whether it's online or offline, and ask other female founders, number 1. And again, you can, for example, search for female investors very well on Crunchbase. So then 7, sorry that I'm, this is maybe sounding slightly negative, but I don't see it as negative. I see this as risk hedging. So because I unfortunately see too many startups that bet on it. They bet on finding funding, and please don't bet on it, because it's not at all, you shouldn't take it for granted that you will get the funding. So my advice to you would be, number 1, as I said already 2 times before, I think now, have a plan. If the funding takes 12 months, right, or 14 months, it can take that long. And also have a plan C if you want, or call that plan B, whatever. Have a plan in case of no funding, because quite often that happens, that that investors say, I'm really sorry, I don't see enough market evidence for your product or your service yet. I don't see it yet. I don't have enough faith in it yet. And in that case, the only option for you, sorry to say that bluntly, is to sell. You simply need to sell. You need to find if there's no market for your product or your service, it's anyhow pointless. That goes against all principles of a smart economy, right? So have a plan in case of no funding, just to not run into any issues, basically. And then last but not least, be mindful of the fundraising seasonality. So the two good times that I've seen now in 4 years, the two best timings is to start approaching investors in the end of January. So middle or the end of January is good. It doesn't matter where you are in Europe, simply because December is a time for closing deals. So investors are usually trying to get the term sheet signed. They are basically already trying to finalize the deal. And of course, you have all the holiday festivities, Christmas, New Year's, and so forth. So usually, I mean, I say it this way: do not approach investors in December. Do not start approaching investors in December, because you might just as well save your energy, okay, and your typing time and so forth. Because the likelihood that this will go into either delete box or into forgotten box is very high. So start approaching investors in end of January, and the same for the same reasoning, holidays, closing deals and so on, which happens usually in June and July. It's then good to wait in August and go out in mid or end of September. So if you are currently thinking about going out and fundraising, let's say you've got all your investor materials ready at the moment, I would say, yeah, okay, send it to investors still now until the end of October, but then better wait until middle of January again. November and December, they're not good months to start approaching investors. But if you are, for example, if you don't have your fundraising materials ready yet, now is a good time to actually prepare your investor deck, your pitch deck for events, your term sheet, and basically all the materials that you need. Yeah, and here I come to the end of the presentation. The key takeaways for you is: be clear again on your preferred investor profile. Have your target list ready before you go out and fundraise. So remember how I said 30 to 40 contacts. Treat the fundraising, take it seriously, right? Like, because I see also many founders like talking to a couple of investors here, then basically not talking to anyone for 6 weeks, talking to some investors again. So when you go for it, okay? Do it, take it seriously. And give yourself 8 to 10 months or better 1 year to find it. And if you are interested, I don't know if any of you are working on your investor decks and so on, or preparing your funding round. I'm doing a monthly masterclass, as David already said. You can always check it out on startupmasterclasses.com. For the moment, it's unfortunately online. It's online sessions, simply because it's COVID related. It's not super easy to do them in person, but I hope that by early next year we can do these sessions again in person. But for now, if you're interested, just go to startupmasterclasses.com, and also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You will find me.